The moment the crumpled, damp cocktail napkin hit Curtis Dalton's chest, the lavish evening was already over. Neither of the men standing on the sun-bleached teakwood knew it yet, but the countdown had officially begun. Curtis wiped a smudge of marine grease from his calloused thumb and slowly looked up. He was 42, dressed in a faded navy t-shirt, saltwater-stained canvas shorts, and worn deck shoes. He had just spent the last 2 hours replacing a heavy brass mooring cleat on the outer dock of the Azure Cove Marina. The private club was the most exclusive nautical sanctuary on the coast, a place where multi-million-dollar mega-yachts rested in pristine waters. Sitting a few feet away on a wooden bench was his 15-year-old daughter, Lily. She wore her headphones, quietly highlighting a history textbook while enjoying the ocean breeze. She loved tagging along on his maintenance runs, knowing they would grab crab cakes at their favorite coastal shack afterward. Stepping off the gangway of a massive, freshly chartered yacht was Preston Sterling. Preston was 25, draped in designer linen and radiating the heavy, unearned arrogance of a man whose father bankrolled his entire existence. Tonight, Preston was hosting an elite tech investor retreat on the docks. "Hey, you!" Preston called out, snapping his fingers sharply. "Someone dropped a tray of champagne near the boarding ramp. Grab a mop and clean it up before my guests step in it." Curtis did not flinch. He picked up his heavy wrench, placing it carefully into his metal toolbox. "I am not part of the cleaning crew, sir. If you notify the concierge desk, they will send the hospitality staff out to assist you." Preston sneered, closing the distance between them. The overpowering scent of his expensive cologne clashed violently with the honest, salty air of the ocean. "I didn't ask for a logistical breakdown from the dockhand. I told you to clean it. Do you have any idea who I am?" Curtis maintained a completely steady gaze. He had dealt with high-strung, wealthy clients for 2 decades. "I know you are a guest at this marina, but that status does not give you the right to issue orders to me." Preston's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. He was entirely unaccustomed to being challenged, especially by someone he deemed socially invisible. His eyes darted away from Curtis and landed squarely on Lily, who had looked up from her textbook, startled by the sudden shouting. "Is this your kid?" Preston demanded, marching aggressively toward the small wooden bench. "Why is she taking up space in the VIP boarding zone? This is a private luxury club, not a public daycare for the hired help. Get her out of here and get to work before I have you fired." Curtis moved with a quiet, terrifying speed. He did not run, but he stepped smoothly and instantly between the young billionaire and his daughter, acting as a solid, immovable barrier. The shift in Curtis's posture was subtle but absolute. "Lily is with me," Curtis murmured, his voice dropping to a low warning timbre that carried clearly over the sound of the crashing waves. "And you need to step back, now." Preston laughed, a harsh and grating sound that echoed down the quiet pier. Are you actually threatening me? I am Preston Sterling. My father rented this entire pavilion in the adjoining docks for the night. That means I own this space, and I own you until midnight. You do exactly what I tell you to do." Lily quickly closed her textbook, her face paling slightly. She stood up, slinging her worn canvas backpack over her shoulder. "Dad, it's okay. I can just go wait up in the truck in the parking lot. I don't want to cause any trouble." "Stay exactly where you are, Lily," Curtis instructed gently, never taking his eyes off the younger man. He turned his attention fully back to Preston. "You rented the space, Mr. Sterling. You didn't buy the staff, and you certainly didn't purchase the right to speak to my family that way." Preston scoffed, waving his hand dismissively as he pulled an expensive smartphone from his linen pocket. "We will see about that. I'm calling the guest relations manager right now. You and your brat are done at this club." Curtis simply watched him. He wasn't going to raise his voice. He knew something Preston didn't. Within minutes, a frantic man in a crisp, tailored suit hurried down the wooden pier. His name was Marcus, the newly hired guest relations manager for Azure Cove. Marcus was sweating profusely, terrified of displeasing his wealthy employer and eager to make a name for himself during his probationary period. "Mr. Sterling, is there a problem? How can I assist you?" Marcus asked, his eyes darting nervously between the yacht and the young heir. Preston pointed a manicured finger directly at Curtis's chest. "This dockhand just refused a direct order, disrespected me to my face, and brought his kid to loiter in my VIP zone. I want him fired, and I want them both escorted off the property immediately." Marcus blinked, finally looking at Curtis. Marcus had only been on the job for 3 weeks. He saw a man in dirty clothes holding a toolbox and immediately assumed the worst. A veteran club concierge named Sarah, who had followed Marcus down the dock holding a digital clipboard, stepped forward. "Marcus, wait, you don't understand who—" "Quiet, Sarah," Marcus interrupted, harshly, determined to show absolute authority. He turned back to Curtis, puffing up his chest. "You know the strict rules about having unauthorized family members during client setups. Pack your things and leave through the service gate right now. We absolutely cannot upset Mr. Sterling." Curtis looked at Marcus. He didn't feel angry at the stressed manager. He merely felt a profound disappointment. Marcus was bowing to perceived wealth instead of standing up for basic human respect. "Marcus," Curtis asked quietly, offering the young manager one final chance to correct his course. "Are you absolutely sure this is how you want to handle this situation? Do you want me to call Marina Security?" Preston barked, taking another aggressive step forward. "Get out before I have you physically tossed into the harbor." Curtis held Marcus's gaze for a long, silent moment. The manager nervously looked away, refusing to back down from his terrible decision. "You're making a massive mistake," Curtis warned. It wasn't a threat. It was a simple statement of absolute fact. "The only mistake I made was expecting competence from minimum wage trash," Preston sneered. "Use the back exit." Curtis did not argue. He did not plead for his job, nor did he try to explain his identity. He knew from years of building his business that arguing with arrogant fools only dragged you down to their level. He reached down, picked up his heavy metal toolbox, and turned to his daughter. He offered her a small, reassuring nod. "Come on, Lily. We are leaving." "That's right, walk away." Preston gloated, his voice echoing loudly across the water. "And make sure you stay off the main boardwalk. I don't want your dirt on the premium decking." Lily kept her head down as she walked beside her father. The cool evening breeze whipped around them as they moved away from the glowing mega yacht. "I'm so sorry, Dad," Lily whispered as they walked across the illuminated stone pathway toward the private parking lot. "If I hadn't been sitting there, maybe he wouldn't have gotten so angry." Curtis stopped under a palm tree and placed a warm hand on her shoulder. "Listen to me closely. You did absolutely nothing wrong. Some people believe their bank accounts give them permission to discard their humanity. That is his tragic flaw, not yours. Never apologize for taking up space in this world." They reached his heavy-duty pickup truck. Curtis opened the passenger door for her, making sure she was settled safely before walking around to the driver's side. He climbed in, but he didn't start the engine right away. Instead, he pulled a sleek tablet from the center console. Curtis Dalton was not a dockhand. He was the founder and sole owner of Dalton Marina Holdings, the company that owned Azure Cove and its surrounding coastal properties. He had built it from nothing. The rental contract Preston had signed was incredibly thorough. Curtis always insisted on a strict code of conduct clause for all clients designed specifically to protect anyone on the property from abuse. Sitting in the quiet cab of his truck, Curtis opened the secure property management portal. He navigated to the active contracts tab and pulled up the Sterling Tech Retreat. He didn't need to shout to prove a point. He held the master keys. The contract displayed on Curtis's screen was crystal clear. Section 7, Paragraph B. Any harassment, abusive conduct, or physical intimidation toward venue personnel or ownership will result in immediate termination of the lease agreement, forfeiture of the deposit, and immediate eviction from the premises. Preston had broken the rules. Now he would face the consequences. Curtis drafted a brief, precise command to the automated building management system and his legal team. "Client Preston Sterling is in material breach of Section 7. Terminate the rental contract immediately. Lock down all shore power to slip 1, cut the pavilion lighting grid, and initiate standard eviction protocol." Curtis, he tapped the screen authorizing the command. True power was never loud. True power was a digital signature on a master deed. "Are we going straight home?" Lily asked, buckling her seatbelt and looking at him cautiously. "No." Curtis smiled softly, turning the key in the ignition. The powerful engine roared to life. "I promised you dinner. How does that seafood shack down the highway sound, the one with the great fried clams?" Lily's eyes widened in surprise. "Really? Even after all that?" "Especially after all that," Curtis replied, steering the truck toward the exit ramp. "Let's let the evening sort itself out without us." Back on the docks, Preston was pacing back and forth, busy berating the catering team for the arrangement of the seafood towers. Marcus stood nearby, anxiously checking his watch as the time for the VIP investor arrivals drew closer. Suddenly, the spectacular ambient lighting illuminating the private pavilion flickered and went entirely black. A second later, the massive shore power cables feeding the mega yacht cut off with a heavy clunk. The yacht's external party lights died. The smart gates at the entrance of the pier slid shut, automatically locking with a definitive metallic thud. Only the sterile glow of emergency track lights remained along the baseboards. "Well? What is going on?" Preston snapped, looking around the darkened pier in frustration. "Marcus, tell the tech guys to turn the lights back on. My father's foreign investors arrive in 20 minutes. Marcus tapped frantically on his tablet, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "I don't know, sir. I'm locked out." Marcus's fingers trembled as he repeatedly tapped the screen of his tablet, but the interface remained stubbornly frozen on a glaring red notification. "The venue's master control app just locked me out entirely," he stammered, panic rising in his throat. It says our administrative access token has been completely revoked. Sarah, the veteran concierge, walked slowly toward them. She held her own tablet, her face calm but her eyes sharp. She had waited for this exact moment. "Marcus!" Sarah called out, her voice cutting through the rising tension. "I just received an automated security alert from the executive director of the marina. Our operational systems are locked. The event is officially canceled." "Canceled by who?" Preston yelled, his voice cracking with sheer panic. He marched toward her, his arrogant facade crumbling. Sarah looked right at the billionaire's son, completely unfazed by his anger. "The email states that the contract was terminated by the property owner due to a material breach of the code of conduct, specifically harassment and abusive behavior." Preston froze in his tracks. "Harassment? I haven't even spoken to the owner." "Call them and clear this up right now." Sarah took a deep breath, delivering the final blow. "The email is signed by Curtis Dalton, the CEO and sole owner of Dalton Marina Holdings, the man you just kicked off his own dock." The name hung heavily in the dead quiet air of the pier. Marcus felt the blood drain completely from his face as his knees weakened beneath him. "Curtis Dalton," Marcus whispered in absolute horror. "The dockhand." "He wasn't a dockhand, Marcus," Sarah replied coldly, shaking her head. "He is the owner of this entire coastal estate. I tried to tell you, but you told me to be quiet. You just helped Preston evict the landlord from his own property." Preston stumbled back a step, running a trembling hand through his perfectly styled hair. His mind raced frantically. This retreat wasn't just a simple party, it was a final test. His father, Arthur Sterling, had provided the startup funding with a strict warning: prove you can handle pressure and leadership or the funding stops permanently. If the investors arrived to a dark-locked dock, his career was over. "This is a joke. It has to be a power play." Preston muttered defensively, though his voice trembled. He pulled out his phone and called the executive director's number listed on the original contract. It rang twice and went straight to an automated voicemail. "Where did he go?" Preston demanded, turning fiercely to Sarah, his eyes wide with desperation. "Where did Curtis go after he left the dock?" "He walked out to the main parking lot 5 minutes ago," Sarah answered calmly, adjusting her clipboard. "He might still be at the front exit gate." Preston didn't wait. He shoved past Marcus, sprinting desperately toward the exit. He threw open the heavy pavilion doors, running out into the humid night air. His expensive leather loafers slapped loudly against the pavement as he sprinted across the illuminated pathways, his chest heaving with exertion. Through the palm trees, he saw the heavy-duty pickup truck stopped at the red light of the estate's main security gate. "Wait, stop!" Preston yelled, abandoning all his dignity as he waved his arms frantically in the air. Curtis saw the billionaire's son sprinting wildly toward his truck in the rearview mirror. He calmly finished scanning his owner's keycard at the terminal. The heavy security barrier slowly began to rise. Preston reached the side of the truck just in time and slapped his open hand against the tinted passenger window. "Wait, roll it down, please. We need to talk." Curtis put the truck in park. He pressed the button, lowering the window exactly 3 inches. He didn't look angry or vindictive. He looked completely indifferent, which terrified Preston even more than rage ever could. "Mr. Dalton?" Preston gasped, trying to catch his breath, his previous arrogance entirely stripped away. "Look, there's been a massive misunderstanding. I didn't know who you were. I thought you were just a worker." "That is exactly the core of the problem," Curtis replied softly, looking straight ahead into the night. "You thought I was someone who couldn't defend himself. You thought I was someone you could step on without consequence. Your respect is entirely conditional." "I'll double the rental fee," Preston pleaded, gripping the edge of the window. "I'll wire you 100,000 right now." "Just turn the shore power back on," Preston begged, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the top edge of the glass. "My father's investors are pulling up in 10 minutes. If this fails, he will cut me off completely." Curtis finally turned his head to look at Preston's desperate, fearful eyes. "A contract dictates how decent people do business, Preston. Section 7 clearly states that abusive behavior toward my staff or my family results in immediate termination. You broke the promise. It was a mistake. I was just stressed about the event." "You weren't stressed. You were cruel," Curtis corrected him calmly, his voice unwavering. "And money does not buy your way out of cruelty on my property." "Please," Preston pleaded, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. "I'll apologize to your daughter right now. I'll get on my knees right here in the driveway." Curtis glanced over at Lily, who was watching the exchange quietly from the passenger seat. She shook her head slightly. She didn't want a forced fake apology from a bully who only regretted getting caught. "Well, we don't need your apology," Curtis stated firmly, his finger resting on the window switch. "Have a good evening, Preston. I suggest you go back to the pavilion and tell your guests the truth before they start asking questions." He pressed the button, rolling the window up completely, forcing Preston to pull his fingers back. Curtis shifted the truck into drive and pulled away, disappearing down the dark coastal highway. Preston stood alone in the quiet parking lot. He stared at the empty street for a long time, the crushing reality of his complete ruin settling heavily on his shoulders. The evening air felt suffocating. By the time Preston walked slowly and defeatedly back to the main entrance of the pavilion, the disaster was fully unfolding. High-end black luxury SUVs were pulling up to the valet stand. Men in sharp, bespoke suits and women in elegant dresses were stepping into the foyer, looking around in utter confusion at the dark, locked gates. Standing dead in the center of the lobby, looking furiously at his gold watch, was Arthur Sterling. Arthur Sterling was a legendary self-made billionaire, a man who possessed a terrifying quiet intensity that commanded entire boardrooms. He spotted his son emerging from the shadows of the pathway, looking pale, sweaty, and completely disheveled. "Preston?" Arthur spoke, his deep voice cutting sharply through the nervous murmurs of the confused guests. "Care to explain why the premier event space on the coast is entirely dark and why the gates are locked?" Preston swallowed hard, walking tentatively toward his powerful father. "Dad, There was an issue with the marina management. The owner breached our contract at the last minute for no reason." Sarah, standing quietly near the reception desk, stepped forward. She had endured enough of Preston's arrogant behavior throughout the afternoon. "Mr. Sterling," Sarah called out, her voice surprisingly steady and clear. "That is not true." Preston whipped around, glaring at her with desperate venom. "Shut up, you work for me tonight." Arthur held up a single hand, silencing his son instantly. He turned his piercing gaze to the concierge. "Go on, young lady. Tell me exactly what happened here." Sarah looked right at Arthur, taking a deep breath. "Preston insulted one of the dock workers, threw a napkin at him, and publicly humiliated his teenage daughter. He had the manager kick them off the property. It turned out the man was Curtis Dalton, the owner of the estate. Mr. Dalton invoked the strict harassment clause and terminated the contract." Arthur stood in stunned, absolute silence. He slowly turned his head to look at his son. The deep, heavy disappointment in his eyes was infinitely worse than any screaming rage. "You threw Curtis Dalton off his own dock?" Arthur asked softly. "The man who holds the primary land leases for our next 3 coastal developments." "I tried to pay him to turn it back on," Preston defended weakly, grasping at straws. "Woo! You're an absolute fool," Arthur stated coldly, his disgust palpable. He turned to his security chief. "Send the investors home. Tell them the launch is canceled." "Dad, please." "It's over," Arthur finalized. "And so is your startup funding. You'll be working in the logistics warehouse starting Monday." Across town, the coastal seafood shack was warm, filled with the comforting hum of conversation, the smell of fried clams, and the sound of a jukebox playing softly in the corner. Curtis and Lily sat comfortably in a wooden booth near the back window, sharing a large basket of fries. Lily took a sip of her lemonade, looking thoughtfully at her father. "Dad, do you think that billionaire guy will try to sue you for canceling the party?" Curtis pulled his phone from his pocket and slid it across the table. On the illuminated screen was a newly received text message from a private premium number. "Curtis, I've just been informed of my son's inexcusable behavior. I offer my deepest apologies to you and your daughter. Preston has been stripped of his position and will be working in our supply warehouse effective tomorrow. I hope this isolated incident does not ruin our long-standing business relationship. Arthur Sterling." Lily read the text, her eyes widening in surprise. Wow, his own dad fired him just like that. "Actions have consequences," Curtis murmured, typing a brief professional reply. He assured Arthur that their corporate relationship was intact, though the rental deposit for the evening was strictly forfeit per the contract. He set the phone face down on the table, completely dismissing the drama of the billionaires. "Did he actually learn his lesson?" Lily asked quietly, dipping a fry in ketchup. "I don't know," Curtis answered, picking up his sandwich. "But it isn't our job to teach him. Our job is to protect our own peace and enforce our own boundaries. When you know your worth, you never have to raise your voice to prove it." Curtis didn't feel triumphant or vindictive. There was no grand, overwhelming joy in ruining a party. But as he sat there eating dinner with his daughter, he felt a deep, unbreakable satisfaction. He had built his life and his business, so he would never have to compromise his dignity. He had walked away from toxicity, and in doing so, he had won completely. If you love this story about setting firm boundaries and standing up to arrogance, hit that subscribe button. We drop new satisfying stories like this every single week. Leave a comment below telling us how you would have handled Preston if you were in Curtis's shoes. Share this video with a friend who needs a good reminder to always know their worth. Keep watching and stay tuned for our next amazing story.